Maybe instead of talking about how great Bam is, I should be blaming him for popularizing black metal and therefore creating all these like angry black metal elitists that show up on my comments and call me names. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock NBA, and today we are talking about the legendary Bam Margera. I don't think he really gets credit for this, but I would say he's arguably one of the most influential people of all time in terms of alternative culture. Up there with people like Hayley Williams, Fred Durst, Marilyn Manson. Because whatever you're into, there's a very good chance that he invented at least part of your lifestyle. And unfortunately, you've probably seen that he's had some tough times in the last couple years as far as struggling with addiction and mental health. So the big questions are, what exactly is Bam's legacy? How big of an impact did he have? And where is he at now? Is he okay? But first, I want to quickly plug my Patreon. Thank you very much to everybody who supports on there. Patrons get every podcast a week early. There's also a members-only private Discord server that I'm in all the time. There's also a way to have me review your music, your video, your design or photography portfolio, a product, like I just reviewed a tabletop game a couple months ago. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can hit the link in the description. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. So first of all, who is Bam Margera? If you're watching this, you probably already know who he is, but just in case you don't, he started his career in the late 90s as a pro skateboarder in the Philly area. This is years before Jackass or Viva La Band or Bam's Unholy Union or the Heartagram or Tony Hawk's Underground 2 or any of the other stuff that you may know him for. What really put him on the map was the series of skate videos that he made, the CKY movies. And I say skate videos because they were kind of only loosely that. It was really more like Bam and all his friends like fucking around and hurting each other for their mutual amusement with a little bit of skateboarding mixed in here and there. They made a total of 4 of them. My personal introduction to the series was when I saw the first one, which back then was called Landspeed. Playing in some skate shop back in like 1999, I think. And I thought it was cool. But my personal favorite was CKY2K, which, as you might guess from the name, came out in 2000. I absolutely loved this movie, like probably a little bit too much. I think my roommate and I watched it at least 3 times a week for like several months. I've probably seen it well over 100 times. We knew every line from every scene and we would say it along with them like little kids do at Disney movies. And to this day, it's one of my very favorite pieces of content ever made in any medium. And that was the moment where I really became a fan of Bam and the rest of the CKY crew. And I guess other people must have felt the same way because this video was super popular. I think they ended up selling like 500,000 copies of it or something. And it was the beginning of Bam's influence. And what exactly was that influence? Well, first of all, let's talk about the music side of things. Because aside from all the poop and guys hitting each other in the balls and all that stuff, the first thing I noticed about CKY2K was the soundtrack. And as far as I know, all that music was chosen by Bam himself. For example, if you know this song, it's because of Bam and the CKY movies. That song is 99 Quite Bitter Beings by his brother Jess's band CKY, who, as Jess himself says, owes pretty much their whole career to Bam featuring them in the movies. Would CKY have reached the level of success it did without Bam? I don't think so, definitely not. We did not have any music industry record label support at all. We got recognition through skateboarding. We're forever in debt to all of that. I think you also have to give him credit for introducing millions and millions of kids to the world of European rock and metal, which might not sound that crazy, but remember how mainstream these shows were. They reran Viva La Band and Jackass and all that shit, and you could not escape it if you watched MTV at all in the 2000s. And he really used that platform to draw attention to this relatively obscure music. Him would be the big example here. They were a fairly obscure, unknown kind of gothic rock or metal band from Finland until Bam became like the world's #1 super fan of him and used his platform to shine a spotlight on them, even going so far as to like direct some of their music videos. I specifically remember my roommate at the time that I was talking about before listening to him, and I was like, what the hell is this? He's like, oh, it's Bam Margera's favorite band. They're called Him. And how many millions of other people back then had that same moment?
it wasn't about secret handshakes between managers.
No.
He was just a random fella who came on knocking on our door.
And Bam's Heartagram logo that you saw probably about like 500 million thousand times in the 2000s on everything from t-shirts to backpacks to his signature element deck, his Adio shoes, and God knows how many tramp stamp tattoos on now 34-year-old moms that got him in high school. Well, that is actually not Bam's logo, that is the Him logo. They originally made it for the band, and I guess he must have like bought or licensed it from them. I always wondered what the arrangement was there. If anybody knows, let me know in the comments, because that thing sold tens, if not maybe like hundreds of millions of dollars in merch, and I'm really curious if they got any kind of royalty from that. But my big question is, why didn't Steve-O's Dicagram take off like that? I can't imagine why. And I think you could also credit him and Bam for at least partly inspiring the little mini goth metal rock trend of the mid-2000s when bands like AFI and 18 Visions and I Am Ghost started dressing like Hot Topic assistant managers all of a sudden. You can also credit him with introducing Rammstein to the American audience. That's how I found out about him, and to this day there's probably millions of people who know the song Du Hast from CKY2K, but probably don't even know who it's by. He also put on a lot of smaller bands, for example, like one of my favorite progressive thrash bands, Believer, Anal Cunt, and Malevolent Creation. There's also one of my favorite scenes where they go to Gigi Allen's grave and CKY covers Bite It, You Scum.
In '93 when Gigi was doing his last tour, he didn't show up. You fucking poison cocksuckers.
Definitely the most mainstream exposure that Gigi Allen ever got, which I'm not sure is a good thing for humanity, but I appreciated it as somebody who's been a Gigi fan forever. I actually went and saw the Gigi documentary Hated in the theater with my dad in like 94, 95, whenever it came out. Probably some questionable parenting on my dad's part, but whatever, the damage is done. He also did 2 comps called Viva La Bands and did a tour around that with Cradle of Filth. And on Viva La Bam, he played bands like Children of Bodom and Dimmu Borgir, and he had Slayer play at his house. And again, remember how massively popular this show was on like the mainstream level. It was on MTV probably like 3 or 4 times a day at its peak. And it doesn't get much more mainstream than that. So really, as far as getting that kind of particular flavor of metal in front of a huge mainstream audience of relatively normal kids who shopped at the mall, I'm not sure that anyone did that more than Bam. So actually thinking about it now, maybe I've got the wrong angle for this video. Maybe instead of talking about how great Bam is, I should be blaming him for popularizing black metal and therefore creating all these like angry black metal elitists that show up on my comments and call me names. So all I ask is this: next time you see some arrogant metal snob walking around proudly carrying the Deathspell Omega album that they just bought, just get their attention, look them in the eye and say, I know your secret. That's right. You had a Heartagram sticker on your bedroom door, didn't you? And then watch his face like turn white as a ghost and not from the corpse paint. And I think you also have to give him a ton of credit for what he did for skateboarding. He was pretty much the 2000s equivalent of Tony Hawk. Although in a way, like Tony Hawk was also the 2000s version of Tony Hawk, but that's another discussion. Meaning that in the same way as he was the on-ramp into all that kind of music, he was also the on-ramp for millions and millions of kids to get into skateboarding, to either try it or at least just like kind of sort of pay attention to skateboarding culture in a way that they hadn't before. For one, God only knows how many of those element decks he sold. And probably a big chunk of those were to people who didn't even skate, that were just Bam or Him fans and put them on the wall. And how many pairs of shoes he moved? Again, probably the majority of those going to people who didn't skate. And maybe you think that's corny, but it was still great for the sport, because all that stuff sold to non-skateboarders was still millions and millions of dollars of revenue coming into the industry that enabled those companies to then use that money to sponsor up-and-coming skaters.
Okay, look, I'm gonna go, and if I hit you, I'm fucking hitting you. I'm gonna give a shit.
For example, his Element teammate, Nigel Houston, whose kind of breakthrough moment, at least for me, was when he was in the Elementality video with Bam back in 2005 or whatever, and is now one of the biggest skateboarders on the planet. Or how many 12-year-old kids bought Tony Hawk's Underground 2 because of Bam, but then from playing the game, they learned who Eric Costin and Rodney Mullen were. Another big thing that I'm not sure people really appreciate is that he had a style that was really fun to watch, even for people who didn't skate, which is important because as much as I respect technical skateboarders, it's really just kind of not that much fun to watch people do fakey heel flips or whatever on flat ground going back and forth. But when you watch Bam skate, even though he's maybe not super technical, you're just like, fuck, that looks so fun. And I always found it funny that as much as he clearly did a lot to grow the sport, he pretty much got nothing but shit for it from like the bitter elitist skater types. They'll tell you he ruined skateboarding because he's the one responsible for the hordes of little Bam wannabes crowding the skate parks, being annoying and getting in the way. And they're right, that did happen and it was because of him. But isn't that a good thing? Don't we want kids to feel comfortable enough to get over the fear of going to the skate park for the first time and wondering if they're going to be accepted? Because here's the thing about skateboarders. They're probably the single most asshole group of snobby, elitist fucking haters on the planet. I mean, they make black metal fans seem friendly and chill. And for sure, that turns off a huge number of kids who otherwise might have gotten into the sport. So the way I see it, to have an ambassador like Bam, who came across as like a really chill, fun, friendly, welcoming guy, is an incredibly important thing for the sport. Alright, so most people are probably aware of Bam's influence on music and skateboarding, but what I haven't heard is anybody giving him credit for his influence as a creator slash filmmaker, which is actually the thing that I personally appreciate most about him. Because if you think about it, he, along with the rest of the CKY and Big Brother guys, really created the template for what a whole lot of the people do now here on YouTube and other social media platforms. Like probably most of us, I initially started watching CKY and CKY2K for the pranks, which to this day stand up as some of the best ever. If you like that kind of stuff and you haven't watched the CKY movies, you definitely need to. My personal favorite part, I think, is when Brandon Dicamillo wipes shit on Ryan Dunn's face while he's asleep. Then Ryan retaliates by Brandon's face when he's asleep. My favorite detail is you can kind of hear the pee pooling up in like his ear. A couple other favorite moments of mine would be this.
Oh, shit.
Or this.
Rake Yohn thought it would be funny to try to set the AM radio on fire. Well, the whole car blew the fuck up 40 seconds from my house. And the only thing I had to pay was $9 for extra insurance.
And of course, this.
The Trojan horse, Thomas shit.
What it comes down to is that Bam walked so people like Vitaly and Roman Atwood could run. He paved the way, no question about it. Tom Green was important too, but Bam and the CKY guys took it to a whole other level. But as much as I love the pranks, that's not really what made me fall in love with CKY2K and become a fan of Bam himself. The reason that those movies resonated with me isn't just because they made me laugh, it's because they were just like dripping with creativity. People now kind of talk about these movies like they're just a grimy collection of pranks and guys punching each other in the balls and stuff, but they're really way more than that. And if you're asking, am I about to intellectualize CKY? Yes. Yes, I am. And proudly.
How tight they're laced. They're tight. They're like footballs.
To me, they felt like a window into the lives of the CKY crew. Pretty much in the same way as vlogs are now. I mean, really, what is CKY but the less obnoxious, douchey version of Jake Paul? I love these movies, not just because they made me laugh, but because they made me feel like I was friends with these guys. There's a term for this in psychology called a parasocial relationship, which is a one-sided relationship where you feel like you're friends with someone in the media, even though they don't even know you exist. That's the basis for the whole reason why influencers are as powerful and influential as they are, because these people are able to create a parasocial relationship with their fans. And we didn't have the term influencer back then, but that's exactly what these movies were doing. They built up all the people in the movies as kind of their own character, with Bam as the centerpiece. And even though he was the focal point, it really wouldn't have been the same without them. That ensemble cast thing is really what made it work. Every one of the characters had their place. For example, like that's one of the reasons why I don't like Jackass that much, because it didn't have Brandon Dicamillo in it. Very underrated member of the CKY crew.
I think it sounds like you're working around a problem. Are you gonna hang up on me too, Dr. Avoido?
And there was like lore, like you knew Rake Yohn hated mustard, and Carrie Getz had a bad temper, and Phil had to get up early to drive his bread truck. It was way more than just a bunch of stupid pranks. It felt like you were making friends with like the ultimate coolest version of people like me, of kids who lived in some boring kind of far out suburb with not a lot to do and amused themselves by doing dumb shit and annoying their neighbors on camera. And so what nobody really gives Bam credit for is that these were really, really well-made films. As far as I know, he edited all of them by himself, and he was, I guess, the director. And they just felt like such a labor of love. Like, he put 110% of himself into every frame. And to me, the proof that he was so good at his craft of filmmaking is that if you remember, the early episodes of Jackass just reused a lot of stuff from the CKY movies. The stuff that he literally filmed in his backyard and edited in his bedroom ended up becoming the backbone of this like wildly popular MTV show in a time where that was like unheard of. That didn't happen. And yes, Jackass was more than just Bam, but I also think it's safe to say that without Bam, there's no Jackass. At least not in the way we know it. And finally, one of the biggest trends in social media of the past couple years is the quote-unquote influencer house, which is where a bunch of YouTubers or TikTokers move in together in some big fancy house and fuck with each other and make content out of whatever crazy shit happens.
Hey, who's your daddy? Hey, who's your daddy?
These people are making millions of dollars a year now and acting like it's some breakthrough idea, but I don't know. Does that sound familiar to you? Yep, CKY crew walked so Hype House could run. And so that brings us to the last part. For anybody who's wondering, whatever happened to Bam? What's he up to now? Well, unfortunately, it's not all good news. It's actually pretty sad. As you may remember, his best friend, Ryan Dunn, who you've probably seen in CKY and Jackass, like one of my favorite parts where he shoved that toy car up his ass and got it x-rayed and made the doctor real uncomfortable.
That's not part of you. That's something extra.
Very funny guy, super important part of the cast and one of Bam's best friends. And unfortunately, he crashed his car and died back in 2011 in a drunk driving incident. And understandably, that really seemed to send Bam off the deep end. He'd been in and out of rehab before that for drugs and alcohol, but after that accident, he went way harder on the drinking. He had quite a few legal issues, like he got arrested in Iceland for trashing a car. He got in a fight with like a bunch of Icelandic rappers or something at the airport. He probably shouldn't go to Iceland again. Seems like it's not a good place for him. And there's a bunch of other stuff, but I'm not gonna spend this video like cataloging every mistake that Bam has made, because that's really just not the point of this. It seems like he's been kind of on and off sober since then. He's done a few interviews where it seems like he's back on track and then he'll relapse again. Probably the most serious one was, I think maybe about 1.5 years ago or so, when he made a bunch of like really erratic, kind of scary, psychotic Instagram posts and asked for Dr. Phil's help and went on there with his family, and it was just really sad to see. He was clearly in a really bad place. It came out that in addition to the alcohol stuff, he had also been struggling with like bipolar and eating disorders and some other stuff. And obviously I'm completely speculating here, but I do have to wonder if head trauma might be a factor, because he's taken a lot of hard falls in his career. And if you look up the symptoms of CTE, it can make people do some pretty impulsive, self-destructive stuff. But as of now, as of October 2020, from looking at his Instagram and some recent YouTube videos, it seems like he's in a pretty good place right now, which makes me happy to see. And I really, really hope that he stays that way, because aside from being so influential and being such an important part of our culture, he really does seem like a good guy at heart. And it always hurts me to see somebody struggling so much with addiction. So Bam, if you happen to see this, know that we're all in your corner. We're all cheering for you. And thank you for everything you've done for us. You made a lot of people happy over the years. All right, my friends, that does it for today's video on Bam Margera. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Would love to hear how he may have influenced you and what you're into. And should we blame him for all the black metal snobs in my comments? But before I let you go, I wanted to mention 2 things. Number 1, my email newsletter that goes out every week with a link to whatever content I put out this week, as well as what I am watching, listening, and reading. You can sign up for that at the link in the description. And also, I wanted to thank everybody who supports us on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. It is because of your support that we're able to do a lot of things with this channel. For example, the podcast. Patrons get every episode of the podcast a week early. There's a members-only private Discord server that I'm in all the time. There's a chance to have me review your music or your video, your photography or design portfolio, your product, whatever it is that you may want to get my feedback on. You can do that if you're a patron at the $10 and up level. So if that sounds cool, check it out at the link in the description. And with that, I'm gonna sign off for now, but I will see you next time.